The Sith lineage and their rule of two towards the end of the Galactic Republic was actually not very linear. In fact, there were a number of Darksiders around this point in time. The most notable is Darth Sidious, known publicly as Sheev Palpatine, and many years later as the Emperor. Darth Sidious and his Sith Master Darth Plagueis clung to the shadows, concealing their true nature from the galaxy until such a time when they could enact their plan to take over the galaxy. This behavior stemmed from a tenet, a rule, created by the ancient Sith Lord named Darth Bane, who outlined the means by which the Sith would survive in a galaxy protected by the Jedi. This tenet, the Rule of Two, established that only two Sith should exist at any given point in time, a Sith Master and a Sith Apprentice, no more and no less. This Rule of Two persisted for a millennium, up until Darth Sidious. The reason this rule existed was due to the fact that the ancient Sith Order had been defeated not only by the Jedi and the Old Republic, but by the Sith's own infighting. They turned on each other frequently, and their own lust for power made them greedy and treacherous towards their own members. Darth Bane acknowledged this, and as the only survivor of the Sith at this time, as far as we know, he established the Rule of Two. Darth Plagueis was Darth Sidious's Sith Master. Plagueis was a moon, and therefore had a lengthier lifespan than that of a human. It is unclear if Plagueis had any apprentices before Sidious, but by the year 52 BBY, Sidious was definitively under Plagueis' tutelage. Darth Sidious, again known publicly as Sheev Palpatine, was born on Naboo in 84 BBY, and many years later, in 52 BBY, he won the election to become the planet's senator due to the influence and help of Darth Plagueis from the shadows. This cements the timeline of the Rule of Two where Sidious and Plagueis are concerned. 12 years later, in the year 40 BBY, Darth Sidious takes on Maul as his Sith apprentice. According to a few sources, notably some visual dictionaries, Darth Sidious claimed Maul as his own, stealing the child from Mother Talzin on the planet Dathomir. Sidious and Talzin evidently despised each other, and decades later, during the Clone Wars, Sidious described Maul as a not-so-appreciated gift from Mother Talzin, and that the woman's spite for Sidious runs deep. Something about this implies a level of dissatisfaction with Maul, which, in hindsight, makes sense considering Maul and Sidious develop a rivalry of sorts much farther down the line. In fact, according to in-universe legend, Talzin was promised to be Sidious's Sith apprentice, but that was a lie and had been a ruse by Sidious to get a closer chance at taking Maul, Talzin's son, as his apprentice instead. Regardless, what we see here regarding the Rule of Two's timeline is that Sidious becomes Plagueis' Sith apprentice by at least the year 52 BBY. Then 12 years later, in 40 BBY, Sidious takes Maul away from Talzin to be his Sith apprentice. For the next 8 years after that, Sidious trains Maul in the ways of the dark side of the Force, all the way up until Maul's defeat by Obi-Wan Kenobi during the Battle of Naboo in 32 BBY. Just prior to this 8-year time period where Sidious trained Maul, another dark side candidate was identified. The Jedi named Dooku, from the planet Sorrento, had become disillusioned with both the Jedi and the Republic. He expressed as much in the year 42 BBY, when he delivered a speech to the Galactic Senate, presided over by Chancellor Skor Kalpana, only to leave the meeting further irritated with the senators and the Chancellor. It is here, outside the Senate chamber, that Dooku was first introduced to Sidious, aka Senator Sheev Palpatine, by Rael Averross, Dooku's former Jedi Padawan. According to him, Senator Palpatine had been providing counsel to Rael Averross for quite a few years. Dooku expressed his frustration with the Senate to Palpatine. Dooku's political ideologies and dissatisfaction with rampant government corruption drove him to leave both the Jedi Order and the public eye shortly after this, claiming his title as the Count of his home planet Sorrento. Keep in mind that this is before Sidious has recruited Maul into the Sith. Now, one little thing I'd also like to point out is that the timing of Dooku's defection from the Jedi Order is listed as 42 BBY in the source material called The Star Wars Book. But because of a little continuity error regarding the secession of the Supreme Chancellors, I'm actually not so sure. I feel like Dooku might have left the Order in 44 BBY instead, but that's just a headcanon of mine. Now, this is where Sidious begins to double dip with Sith apprentices, and we're not even sure if Darth Plagueis is still around, though he very likely could be. What we know is that at some point before the year 32 BBY, Plagueis was murdered by Sidious in his sleep. Plagueis and Sidious had been searching for the key to immortality, but once Sidious was satisfied with everything he'd learned from his Sith Master, he killed Plagueis and continued his plans for achieving immortality as well as galactic domination. Meanwhile, during this time period between 40 BBY and 32 BBY, Darth Sidious trained 2 apprentices. Darth Maul was his more traditional apprentice, teaching him all the typical dark side tenets and lore, even taking him to the planet Malachor, the location of a major Sith defeat many years prior. Sidious kept Maul as an assassin in the shadows, sending him to dispose of loose ends and to protect his assets from enemies, as well as from discovery. For example, Sidious would send Darth Maul to defend the Trade Federation from pirate attacks from time to time. While Sidious kept Maul in the dark and fanned the flames of his anger, the Sith Master continued to slowly influence the now Count Dooku to the dark side. By this point, Dooku was no longer a member of the Order, but he was granted access to the temple as both a show of good faith and as an invitation. Dooku frequented the temple often in the early years of being a Count, but was rarely seen anywhere else. During these visits, Dooku deliberated with the Jedi Council and his former Jedi Master, Yoda, and at one point around this time, he was approached once more by Senator Palpatine. Dooku expressed his irritation with the Jedi Council and the Republic again to Sidious, who shared his beliefs, and thus began the partnership of Sidious and Dooku. Sidious twisted Dooku further and further toward the dark side, and Dooku gave in more and more. In fact, in 40 BBY, at least 2 years after Dooku left the Jedi Order, Dooku had reached out to his first former Padawan, Rael Averross, in an attempt to convince him to join the Count on Sereno to learn the dark side of the Force alongside him, but Rael denied the offer. Furthermore, according to Qui-Gon Jinn, Dooku had yet to reach out to Qui-Gon since leaving the Order, meaning that in all that time, Dooku had not attempted to convince Qui-Gon to join him. Sidious revealed to Dooku his grand plan to destroy the Republic via the fabricated Clone Wars. Closer to the year 32 BBY, Dooku's former best friend in the Jedi Order, Sheev Palpatine, placed an order to the cloners on Kamino, commissioning an army of clones to hold in reserve should the Republic ever require protection. Dooku and Sidious learned of this and had Sheev Palpatine assassinated, then assumed his role in the transactions with the cloners on Kamino. Dooku then traveled to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant and removed Kamino from the Jedi archives, where he learned of Qui-Gon Jinn's encounter on Tatooine with Darth Maul, Sidious's other Sith apprentice. Dooku would then leave the temple and rendezvous with Darth Sidious in the industrial district on Coruscant, but they were discovered by the Jedi Yaddle. Dooku would defeat Yaddle in a duel and kill her, falling even further to the dark side from this, and officially receiving the title of Darth Tyrannus from Darth Sidious. A short time later, Qui-Gon Jinn's Padawan, Obi-Wan Kenobi, would defeat Darth Maul in a lightsaber duel on Naboo, thus leaving Sidious and Tyrannus to continue the rule of two for the next 13 years. However, once Darth Maul lost to Obi-Wan, Sidious had already found his next apprentice in the young Anakin Skywalker, and began to manipulate and influence him as Palpatine. Dooku was aware of this, and had even found an apprentice of his own, Asajj Ventress. She served as Dooku's personal assassin for years. Dooku had either not fully embraced the Sith rule of two, or he prioritized his mission for galactic change more, because Dooku had suggested to Sidious that they rally other Jedi to their cause, such as the Jedi Knight Jack Zinn. Dooku had been sent by Sidious to the planet Sullust to negotiate with the Soro Sub Corporation and to locate the Kaldana Syndicate. On this secret mission, Dooku encountered Jack Zinn, who recognized Count Dooku from his days at the Jedi Temple. Having reached out to Sidious via hologram, Dooku wondered if there was a chance to rally the Jedi Knight to their cause, but Sidious shut the idea down immediately. This, however, would not be the last of this mentality, as part of Sidious's plans eventually involved turning Anakin Skywalker to the dark side as well, with Dooku's help. The Sith apprentice was aware of this, but seemingly had no doubt that Sidious would not replace him with Anakin. Dooku and Sidious would eventually begin the Clone Wars in 22 BBY, with Dooku leading the Separatists and Palpatine leading the Republic. Towards the end of the galaxy-wide conflict, Dooku and Anakin would duel each other in front of Palpatine. Anakin would win this duel, disarming Dooku and holding 2 lightsabers before the Sith's throat. Palpatine urged Anakin to kill Dooku, which surprised the leader of the Separatists. Dooku turned to his Sith Master, realizing that Anakin's turn to the dark side did indeed mean that Dooku would have to die. Anakin obliged, leaving Sidious as the only Sith left, at least temporarily. The Clone Wars would come to a swift end, and Sidious's plan for galactic domination and the acquisition of Anakin Skywalker as a Sith apprentice would be realized. So, to recap the Sith lineage, Darth Sidious attained his position as Senator of Naboo in 52 BBY, with the assistance of Darth Plagueis. Then, around 42 BBY, Dooku left the Jedi Order, and Sidious began to twist the Count to the dark side. A couple years later, Sidious steals Maul away from Mother Talzin and takes the child on as his Sith apprentice. For the next 8 years, Sidious trains both Maul and Dooku, and at some point in this time frame, Sidious kills Plagueis. Then, once Darth Maul seemingly died at the Battle of Naboo, Sidious officially named Dooku his next apprentice, naming him Darth Tyrannus. However, Palpatine had already set his sights on turning Anakin to the dark side to replace Tyrannus, which he of course eventually did at the end of the Clone Wars.